Okay, Brent, over to you.
All right. Okay, well, we will go ahead and get started. We're getting a little bit of feedback, so if you're not talking, please mute, because what'll happen is you'll get a feedback going of one person talking, going through somebody's speakers, and then back into the microphone and coming back around. So please, you can unmute if anybody does want to talk as we go through. So welcome to the first fully remote version of Advanced Project Program and Portfolio Management. We've spent a little bit of time over the last couple of days testing out the technology. Hopefully everything will go great. We may hit a couple of glitches along the way, so please bear with us because this is the first time we've tried to do a tag team Zoom teaching session. So hopefully everything is going to go great. Before we get started, can everybody hear me okay? And can everybody see the screen? You should see the front page of the slides for today. All right, we're getting some thumbs up, so I'm just going to charge ahead. Well, maybe my keyboard is not. Interesting. All right, let's try this again. There we go. All right, getting started. So again, we are now at the third and final week of portfolio management. It seemed to have flown right on by. This one has some of my favorite content of the 3 weeks. I actually missed some of my favorite topics last time, but I think this one really has some of the good content that I really enjoy talking about. So because nobody has a bus to catch, we may go slightly long tonight, but I'm really going to target getting us done on time today. I see people shaking their heads no, so I will look to Jay to keep me on point and to start waving his hands if it looks like we're going to be going long tonight. So after today, the portfolio quiz will kick off. Then it will be spring break. So one of the things you'll notice, and we'll cover this at the end again during the administrative updates, but all of the deliverables for this week, everything that's assigned coming out of this week, you have 2 weeks to complete. So that applies to the portfolio quiz, that applies to the survey for this week, that applies to the discussion questions. Of course, with the survey and the discussion questions, you have slightly less than 2 weeks because those are on their normal cadence plus 7 days. But for the portfolio quiz, you will have a full 2 weeks. Again, you've taken project, you've taken program. The portfolio quiz will look very, very similar to those two. I just went through the entire quiz again last night. Again, if you've been keeping up, if you've been participating, watching the sessions, reading the slides, should not be a problem for any of you. In fact, I would encourage you may just want to knock it out in the next day or two, and then you don't have to think about it for the next 2 weeks. Because I think a lot of you are going to immediately shift looking ahead to the final project, which is where we're going to be spending the final part of class today. So let's advance. If you look, let's see, I don't think, can you all see the pointer on the screen? Oh, good, you can see the pointer. All right, now I can't, oh, there it went away. All right, so again, academic content, academic content, academic content. This week, instead of the usual case study content, we have this big purple swath here, Pac-Man's mouth. This is the final project discussion. So that's the point. I'm going to hand things over to Jay, and Jay is going to be speaking in depth about what the final project for the course looks like. Again, I don't think any of you will be upset when you see it. I think you'll actually have a lot of fun with it, hopefully. That's the intent. Oh, we have animation. I should have guessed we had animation. All right, there you go. Portfolio risk, final project discussion. There we go. All right. Project portfolio management around the world. So obviously, an awful lot has happened since the last time I spoke in class, and I unplugged for about 5 days and returned to a completely different reality. Let's just do a quick touch point, just go very quickly around. How might you relate what we've been talking about in class to really what's been going on in the world? And again, it does not have to be everything pandemic related. If you want to talk about Disneyland or something fun, you can absolutely do that as well. But any topics have jumped into your minds over the last week or so related to the course?
Well, we were supposed to go to the Netherlands in a week, and I'm finding out just how unpaired the airlines are. They obviously haven't added worldwide pandemic to their portfolio risk register ahead of time. We're flying Iceland Air, and they're doing absolutely everything they possibly can to prevent helping people to get refunds. It's not looking good for us for sure. And if you look on their Facebook page, it's everybody is just bashing them, and even saying that other airlines are doing a better job, which I don't know because I haven't been on other airlines, but just thinking about how you would have that in your portfolio risk management and have a plan for it, because I don't think anybody really could have planned for this and how it would affect their portfolio and how they move forward.
It's a very, very good example. So let me just ask a quick question related to that. So thinking of the coronavirus, thinking of the pandemic, do you think that is most applicable from a risk management perspective? Is that most applicable at the project, program, or portfolio level?
Well, I think it would be at the portfolio level because it would trickle down to every component underneath.
Yep. But then it probably propagates down because every one of those components needs to be planning for it as well. But I would agree with you. I think it would start at the top level and then work its way down, ideally. You know, just imagine you might be the really, really prepared project manager as part of a program in a portfolio. And if the portfolio manager and the program manager are not actively looking at the risks and managing those risks, then unfortunately it might be your job as the project manager, but in the ideal world, you'd have that trickle down and that connection between all of them.
Yeah.
I would offer too, I think with everything that's been going on with CU Boulder, all the communication from President, the Chancellor, from you guys, from a lot of the seniors, if you're the Chancellor, you're kind of looking at a portfolio level in terms of trying to assess risks. What are the risks that are really going to hurt you? And really looking across everything from dorms to food service to certain things that you have to keep going, like campus security. I saw there was a thing in the research areas at school where there's some animals that Boulder has, and you have to keep feeding the animals. So somebody's going to be taking care of the animals because they don't have a choice. And just that just strikes me as a good example of a portfolio assessment that somebody at the chancellor level has to look at. And obviously it's the rate of change and the rate of information flow is just accelerating on a daily basis. So that's a huge challenge, obviously.
Yep, that's a good way of looking at it, though. Again, it's applying, we don't use portfolio and program too much on the campus level. You just don't hear those terms very often, but you could think of the university in that way, or perhaps as if there was a level above the portfolio, that could be the university. There are an awful lot of moving parts in the university. And then you expand that to the entire University of Colorado system, there are even more moving parts. And my building, so I'm in RL1 on East Campus. Right now I'm at home, obviously, but my regular office is in RL1. And the main floor of RL1, a lot of animal research had been done in the past. So when we moved in, they still had all of those cages there. And you're absolutely right. You can't just leave the animals there. Somebody has to take care of them. I went in on Sunday and brought all of my plants home because somebody needs to water those plants. So that's a very good point. is interesting too. My wife is a school social worker, so she primarily works with 1st through 6th grade, and she pointed out that these schools may be closed, but a lot of families count on the schools for feeding their kids during the school year. So if school is closed, a lot of the schools are needing to step up and make sure that those students are still getting fed. Is a lot of the lower economic families can't afford to feed their kids, and so that's something that had never occurred to me, that that's a big part of it as well. All right, anything else? And again, it does not have to be coronavirus related. It could be
I'll offer
Jay's
one
shirt. It could be something related to Jay's shirt.
Yeah, it's to keep everybody awake, myself included. First of all, the plant you brought home looks fantastic in your office there in New York, right behind you. It's doing well. I would just say that in the absence of a portfolio level or even higher at the organization or government level, as things break down, things kind of localize to the project management level. And so all your fundamental skills at the project management level sort of bubble to the surface. If you don't have that governance coming down from a portfolio, things still have to get done. So you might have localized project management going on, a whole bunch of rogue projects, just people, individual households doing things in the absence of a government plan or a department plan or something like that. So sometimes we kind of poo-poo the idea of project management as the lesser of the three, but in some cases it's the only thing that keeps going because it's local. It's always local, and it's where everything gets done. So don't dismiss those skills and the organization around having a risk plan or having a schedule with your family and all those things. So anyway, on to brighter and better topics.
All right, let's talk portfolio management. I see a lot of smiles in the audience today. Everybody's looking forward to that. All right, let's try this again. And unfortunately, I have 3 different monitors, and apparently when my mouse is on one of the other monitors, I can click all day long and nothing happens on the screen you're looking at. So please bear with me if we get stuck on a slide while I'm furiously clicking and nothing is happening. All right, so again, we are shifting back to the standard for portfolio management. We're covering sections 6, 7, and 8 today. The good news, I think, is that there is a lot of good content in there, but there's also some filler as well. So my focus today is going to be on the key content in each of the chapters. And so that's where we're going to be spending our time. And as I was reviewing it one last time last night, there is a lot of good key content. So there are some slides I definitely want to spend a bit of time on tonight. All right, chapter 6, or section 6 as the PMI likes to call it. So now we're into stakeholder engagement. So again, portfolio stakeholders, these are the individuals, the organizations, or groups that can affect, may be affected, or perceive themselves to be affected by a portfolio. So that feels like just about everybody, doesn't it? That's a pretty broad definition, but it's true. And I think the reason that it's important to think this through is that a lot of our projects, a lot of our programs, a lot of our portfolios can impact an awful lot of people. So it really behooves you as the project manager, the program manager, the portfolio manager to be thinking through who are those people that may, can, will be affected by what it is you're doing, and you try to actively seek them out. I think you can pretty much assume from day one, you're not going to get everybody. I don't think I've ever done a project where somebody hasn't popped up at the 11th hour and had some real concerns with this project that they were just hearing about. But you want to do your due diligence, and again, you don't just do this at the beginning of the project or at the beginning of the portfolio or the program. It's a continuous activity throughout. So again, if you look at all the action verbs here, can, maybe, could be affected, keep all of those things in mind. Those are the things that you want to be looking for. And again, in this new format, since I I can't just look out across the classroom for hands waving. If you do have a question, please feel free. With my background being what it is, my hand sort of phases in and out, but just wave your hand and we will stop. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions on any of these slides. All right. So I'm actually going to shift very quickly over to one of these supplemental reading articles. So quick poll for everybody. How many of you have already read this one? Johnny's read it? Lauren's read it? Michelle doesn't want to admit if she's read it or not. All right, please do read this article. If you look at the discussion questions, actually one of the discussion questions asks you to read this article. So it behooves you to take a look at this. So I want to talk very quickly about each of these. So again, we're veering away from the standard for a moment. We're going to talk about this article. But again, look at these 10 principles. So what they're saying, and again, this is just stakeholder management that spans all 3 project, program, and portfolio. So just generically spanning all of those areas. So the article is saying you need to communicate, you need to consult early and often. You need to remember that your stakeholders are only human, which is interesting because we just heard stakeholders could be an entire organization, but just think of it this way, that entire organization is made up of humans. You plan it, make sure that you are planning to do adequate stakeholder management. Relationships are key. We're going to keep coming back to this. I know we're nearing the end of the semester, but we've talked an awful lot about relationship building and communication. And again, stakeholder management, that is absolutely essential. So this one's interesting in that it says it's simple, but it's not easy. So read through the article, they'll explain what they mean by that. But again, it can be fairly overwhelming, but like anything else, you can break it down into smaller components and then execute on those components. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming. I would never call it easy. I'm not sure I would ever call it simple, but when you read the article, you'll see what they mean by that. It's just a part of managing risk. I think that's a bit of a generalization. This one I may not fully agree with, but again, it goes hand in hand with managing risks because the stakeholders can be the source of an awful lot of those risks. So if you're managing the stakeholders, you're managing a lot of your risk portfolio as well. Compromise, again, compromise is key in a lot of different areas. Compromise between stakeholders, very important. Understanding what success is. So if you remember way back to those project management chapters where we were talking about agile development, one of the key things that they hit you over the head with when you're taking agile training is defining what is done. What is done? If it's if you're going through more waterfall-esque, it's defining your success criteria. No matter how you look at it, you need to understand what success is so that you can be targeting that. And then finally, take responsibility. This applies for both you as the portfolio manager, and ideally it would be all of your stakeholders as well. The only thing that you can truly control, though, is that you as the portfolio manager are taking responsibility. So I'm going to cheat just a little bit because this is one of the discussion questions that you'll see when you log in. So for those of you that are actually online and live this evening, pick a factor. Which of these do you feel are the most important? And there are no wrong answers. This is just your own personal perception. Johnny.
So actually, I actually sent this article to all the PMs in our company in an email 2 weeks ago because I was like, this is like everything in it was like perfect for us. And the one that I highlighted, the one that I quoted in the email was they're only human. That's one of the complaints we get a lot in our company is difficult customer, difficult person to deal with. And that's sort of the excuse for maybe us not delivering, right? That person's just difficult. So I like that it said something to the effect of, like, if you can understand what the motivations behind their behaviors, maybe you can modify how you interact with them. And I thought that was, for us, for my company, that was a key piece that would be useful to us.
All right, great, thank you. Johnny, you had your hand up in the air too.
Yeah, initially I was looking at consult early and often. I thought that was really important, but I feel like I keep looking through the project management lens because that's more what I'm jumping into. But when I think more about portfolio, I think number 9, understand what success is. It just sounds more strategic to me. You're looking at the organization overall, or the conglomeration of all your projects and programs, and at the wholesale level there, what is success? I think if you can figure that out as a portfolio manager, then you're doing all right.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any of these really jumping out at you?
Yeah, Brett. So I was going to say, for a portfolio, I actually think relationships are key, because you never know what new project's going to come up down the line that you're going to need that relationship. So developing it first, and I've actually seen this in my experience. If you already know who to talk to when you have an incident come up, you can actually get things solved a lot quicker. And then you also, kind of talking to what John said, you know what they want ahead of time before you need them. So in a portfolio aspect, I would say relationships.
That's good. And you touched on planning it as well. You're making this a part of your plan. Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, I was gonna say compromise, but it's also related to what John was talking about, remembering that they're only human. Because I have yet to do a project, or I haven't really done portfolio management, but I can imagine it only magnifies when you're working across many projects and many programs. But I've never had one where all of the stakeholders were happy about what we're doing. And it's really important to understand what their motivations are and why they might not be happy about it, and try to negotiate that compromise that they can accept it and they can move forward with it, but without derailing the project or portfolio completely.
Good, thank you. Another good example. And again, the good news for each of you that's actually live here today, this is one of the discussion questions. So you're essentially getting free points. You just have to type up what you just said and you get free points this week. So thank you for all of your opinions on that. And if you haven't read the article yet, please do read the article. I thought this was a good one. I wanted to give you a personal example for Remember They're Only Human. So I went to Home Depot over lunch today, and I was trying to get this motion sensor light that I could put on the side of my house. And I found an associate. He said, "Excuse me," started explaining what I was looking for, sort of talking really fast to explain to him that the display was gone and why I wanted this thing. And he sort of snapped at me a little bit. He said, "Well, if you would stop talking, I would tell you where you can find this light." And I was a little taken back by that. And he told me where. He's like, "Go to aisle 9. I went to aisle 9. But as I was walking away, I sort of took this one to heart, in that just think about what these people working at King Soopers and Home Depot and working at these stores have been through over the last week. And as soon as I sort of put it into that perspective, I had no more anger, no more. I fully understood where that was probably coming from. Who knows how many long shifts this guy has been working. So remember, they're only human. Try to put yourself in their perspective. Very few people are actually coming at you with evil intent, but they all have their own lens to the world, their own perspective to the world. So you want to try to look at it from their perspective as well. And it was funny because I had finalized these slides just last night. So this article actually did pop into my mind as I was walking over trying to find the light, which was actually out of stock. So that was the end of the story, was they didn't actually even have it. And they're completely out of propane if you're looking for propane, by the way. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Jay's probably already thinking we're way behind schedule. All right. Portfolio stakeholder management. So there are 3 main stakeholder groups according to the PMI. So you have the executive leaders and managers of an organization. You have internal or external organizations and individuals working for a portfolio component. And again, remember, PMI is using component to represent the programs, the projects, and even the operations down below. And then the internal or external users and customers of the portfolio components. And again, that is a pretty wide net. But this also really feels like a good quiz question. So this is the sort of thing you may want to remember as we go forward. All right, let's take a look at this stakeholder interest table. So this again is one of those examples where I think a picture is worth 10,000 words. And this is something that I would encourage you to carry in your toolkit as you go forward, especially as you go from project to program to portfolio. If you follow that progression, it gets more and more important to do this, because in a smaller project, you might be able to do this in your head. In a program, it's getting really hard to do this in your head. At the portfolio level, it's probably impossible to do this in your head. So I would encourage you, put this in your toolkit. What I like about this, again, is that it's breaking it down into what are the groups, what are the roles within the group, so what roles do each of those groups play, what are their interests, what are their expectations, and you take the time and you fill this out for your, in this case, I'm going to use all three, for your project, for your program, or for your portfolio. So for those of you that have managed projects before, or even at the program level, have you used something like this before, and how might you use this to guide your communications? Jay, do you have any examples that you might want to bring up?
Well, in the absence of looking at the 10,000 words, as you put it, I've mentioned this before. Stakeholders follow the money. So the prior slide had a whole bunch of best practices, remember they're human, and so forth. And that's once you've identified a group as a stakeholder. But part of the biggest challenge is not even at that point, it's before that, when you have multiple groups or multiple people thinking, I'm the stakeholder or I'm the primary stakeholder, and all these things that are up on this table apply. But when there's no tiebreaker, go to the money, go follow the money, because somebody always has the purse strings, and at the portfolio level, that's what's going to make the decision. And I was living that today in a meeting where things just collapsed into chaos because we were all remote. Everybody was talking over each other, and eventually I had to IM my sponsor and say, remember, you own this, you own the money. And so her role as the primary stakeholder took over, and she was able to get control of the meeting again. I know that's not exactly germane to this particular table, but that is important, is follow the money.
So let's also tie that back into this grid, because again, if you've looked at this grid, and I know it might be really tiny on your screen, this is very communication centric. So where you can use something like this table, if you understand their roles, you understand their interests, and you understand the expectations at each of these levels, if you read through these bullet points for the expectations, there's a lot of key information about how these people want to receive notifications, how these people want to receive information. So in the case that Jay just brought up, him knowing how his key, the role of his key stakeholder and how he could reach out to communicate to the key stakeholder to bring this chaotic situation under control, he knew that ahead of time. And that's something, Lauren was just saying, you've already established those relationships, you've already worked, you've built this network, you've done your planning. It is very, very much true that you want to plan twice and cut once. You want to think through these channels. You want to already have identified how you're going to be acting on these things as you go forward. So one additional element of this too is that you can revisit this. You can show this to your team. You can revisit this, and then as you identify new people, you can continually add to and modify this grid. A lot of the deliverables, when I first got into project management 20 years ago, the emphasis really seemed to be on create this document, put it on the shelf, and move on to the next document. And if you look at project management today, if you look at program and portfolio management today, the emphasis is on create these things early and then keep revisiting these things, keep refining these things. Because I would throw out there that any document that you create, that you spend all this time creating, and you just put it on a network drive and never look at it again, is probably not a terribly valuable document. Again, design document, there can certainly be some exceptions to that rule, but in general, you want these things to be living, active documents that you and your project team, your program team, your portfolio team see the value in creating. So again, this is just one of those examples of something that I think it would be a really valuable tool for you to carry forward into your next project. All right, now we're talking about portfolio engagement or stakeholder engagement. So the focus of this section is less on the regular exchange of information that is directly connected to the performance of portfolio management functions and more on the conscious activity of engaging portfolio stakeholders through two-way communication and interaction. And again, just like we were just talking about on the previous slide, if you look at the expectations of those stakeholders, that table was very much communication centric. And that table should be forcing you as the portfolio manager to be actively focusing on engaging these stakeholders. And if, you know, having read all of your discussion questions over the last couple of weeks when we're talking about sponsors and stakeholders, it's really tough to get these folks. You know, I've had sponsors where you're lucky if you get that 2-minute window as you're going up the elevator every week, but you need to keep trying, you need to keep hacking away at that. Because if your stakeholders and especially your sponsor are completely disengaged, you're on a very bad path. And it just gets worse the farther you go. So again, what this chapter, again, this particular sentence, you know, I hate to just keep reading off sentences on the screen here, but this is a very important section. And again, this is emphasizing that we're not just focused on the regular exchange of information. You know, saying, hey, I'm going to send out a weekly status report, that's great. That should be there in your communication plan. But your stakeholder engagement plan, let me see if I can actually go backwards using these multiple windows. Yep, there we go. Your stakeholder interest table right here is not focused on, I'm going to send out a status report every week. It's focused on, for every one of these stakeholder groups, how are you going to reach out to them in meaningful two-way conversation, ideally. All right, moving along. All right, so it's critical that portfolio stakeholder identification and analysis activities do not inhibit or constrain the interactions with programs and projects more than necessary. Therefore, the focus is on guidance and enablement rather than constraint. And for those of you that have worked at the project or program level, you can probably appreciate that. You know, if the emphasis from above, if the emphasis from the portfolio level is on constraint, you've been disempowered to do what you need to do as a project or program manager. So I think this statement is a good reminder for you as a portfolio manager, for any of you when you get to that level, that hopefully you have very good, talented people at the project and program level. And so you can provide them with guidance, you can give them advice, but you rarely want to be clamping down on them and constraining them. Again, there will always be edge cases and there will always be exceptions, but this is a sweeping generalization or a sweeping statement. Any questions about this one? Or Jay, anything you wanted to add on this one? All right, moving right along. All right, portfolio management guides and directs the overall portfolio and its components. Program management may do that as well as steer, but again, it is the role of the project manager to execute, and it is important that portfolio management does not overstep its responsibility. So again, we're just building on that previous statement again, that at the portfolio level, you're very, very strategic. You're operating way up here, and at the project management level, your focus is on execution. So in general, you want to leave the tactics to the project managers and to a certain extent the program managers, but most of your focus at the portfolio level is strategic. All right, stakeholder context. So every portfolio has stakeholders who operate at different levels and have different interests. So very much a true statement. So again, this is another good example of a table that you can use, that you can keep in your back pocket to identify, you know, who are the people, who are the stakeholders, what are their concerns, and what is the context. So again, here you're talking, I'll pick one, here we'll pick the engineer. So what is the engineer there for? Well, they're there to design the solution. So what are they going to care about? the specifications, the drawings, and the models or use cases. So again, this is breaking down this large group of stakeholders, because again, if you remember back, the definition of a stakeholder is just about your entire company. Maybe not quite that extreme, but you've got an awful lot of moving parts there. So when you start to break it down to this level, it starts to be actionable for you as the portfolio manager. So again, another great table. Again, I would rather have you filling out this table than a 20-page Word document, which might have the same information in it. I am a huge fan in my world of the one-pager. Whenever possible, I'll tell people, create the one-pager and give that to me. Let's talk to the one-pager. As soon as you start handing out 5-page documents or 5-page emails, you really start to lose your audience. All right, communications matrix. So one more table to throw at you. So the communication matrix, and this is the example right off of page 73 here, is foundational to building the communication management plan. So remember earlier where we were talking about those weekly activities, those recurring activities, this is where those belong. So now you're actually talking about your governance decisions. How often are those happening? How often are you revisiting your portfolio? How often are you sending out your reports? This is actually bleeding over into your communication matrix, into your communications. So there's a difference between your stakeholder matrix and your communications matrix. But both of them are very important and very powerful for you as you go forward. All right, questions? I will pause for a quick drink. Jay, is there anything you want to add while I'm taking a quick drink here?
Yes, you can navigate through the survey. There's very limited animation. I think you can handle it, and we're good to go.
All right, let's dive into the survey and the limited animation. All right, the survey last week, based on what you have learned so far in the PPM space, which discipline do you think has the highest stress level? All right, interesting. Program management is the highest level. So again, there were no incorrect answers. Here's Jay's perspective. Jay, why don't you just summarize your perspective instead of having me read this one?
Yeah, so program, I'll paraphrase it. Program gets squished in the middle. You're dependent on projects for performance. So there's a stress level from that because it's somewhat out of your immediate control. It might be in your realm of influence, but it's outside your control. And the program level, you're always getting squeezed by the portfolio from above. So in my experience, program is the most stressful. Portfolio generally comes with more authority, so you can enact change, or you can withhold funds, which is a great way of enacting change. And projects, again, ideally you have authority as a project manager, and so you are in control of your local environment. So that should reduce the stress a little bit there. And so I would agree with the consensus or the majority here that program management is the highest stress level. And there were no fun questions this week, unless that one was considered.
There were no banned questions. I was really expecting at least one banned question this week.
And too much time working on the final, so maybe next week.
All right, if there are no other questions, we're going to dive right back into the chapter content. So again, now we are on portfolio value management. So there's not as much content here. Risk management, which is our final one. I have a lot of content I want to cover, so this one's going to go pretty fast. All right, now we're on to value management. So again, the definition from page 1, portfolio value management ensures that investment in a portfolio delivers the required return as defined in the organizational strategy. That's the key part I wanted to emphasize there. And again, that's the key part of what we're focusing on at the portfolio level is generally at the highest level. Are you aligned with the strategy? Are you providing value? We keep coming back into benefits and value and strategy, and we're going to see that throughout this chapter as well. Like on the very next slide, there you go. So some definitions here. So in this case, value is an indicator of the effect an entity or offering can deliver. So here, PMI is just defining their terms as we go forward into this chapter. For value to be recognized, metrics are required. So I've never seen a portfolio, at least a mature or operating portfolio, exist without some form of metrics along the way. You have to have some metrics. And again, your challenge as the portfolio manager is to find the right level of metrics to use. There are all sorts of things you can choose from out there, but if your metrics are not providing value, I'd say just scrub those metrics and focus on those metrics that can provide value. So metrics related to value may attach to tangible and intangible outputs or effects, just as value may be tangible or intangible. So I thought that the chapter did a pretty good job of talking this through. We tend to put those in mind as well. All right, now we've actually got a good chart we can talk to. So again, to effectively manage value, and again, at the end of the semester, I want to go back and do a quick word count for all of the slides. And I'd almost be willing, and once you remove all of the A's, ands, and thes, value may be the term we use the most, especially when we're talking portfolio. I'm sure it is through the roof for portfolio. So to effectively manage value, the portfolio manager should negotiate the expected value, focus on maximizing the return, on realizing the return, on measuring performance, and then again, reporting on the value. So it behooves you as the portfolio manager to be constantly revisiting this and again, reporting on the value. So if you think about what your executives are focusing on, so in Jay's example earlier, all of the executives on the room in his particular meeting, how many different things were each of them trying to juggle at any given point? In this very narrow window of time, they might all be focusing on the topic at hand, or they may not. So for you as the portfolio manager, you want to keep coming back to, why does this portfolio exist? What value is it providing? And then you want to back that up with some metrics and some reports that actually show, are you on the path or not to achieve the value that you've described? If you can't describe that, eventually people forget, or they get distracted by all the other things, and then potentially that's when portfolios get defunded too, if people are forgetting why they approved this thing to begin with, especially if it was approved 4, 5, 10 years ago by a completely different crop of executives. So that's where it behooves you as the portfolio manager, keep revisiting it, keep it fresh, and keep it current. All right, portfolio value management. So again, there is the organizational risk that the portfolio focuses too heavily on maximizing the return, losing sight of the true requirement, which is to return value. It becomes very easy to move to a regime where the organization and therefore the portfolio manager become focused on cost and loss and loses sight of value, undermining the return achieved. So again, this is a very, very important note, and that's why I wanted to read the entire thing, because if your organization is just focused on, again, the bottom line, and they can't be looking ahead longer term, that's going to be a real problem, not only for the organization, but it's going to be a real problem for you as the portfolio manager. So as a portfolio manager, try not to fall into that trap. Try to keep gently prodding those folks above that might be looking in that direction about some of the longer term gains that can be achieved. Every time I've been in an organization where everything is now focused on cutting costs and quick wins, it's been devastating within a couple of years. You need to keep that long-term view. And again, when you think of projects and programs and portfolios, the emphasis of the program is on the long-term view, and that's why it behooves you as the portfolio manager to keep this in mind. All right, another good chart. So the underlying premise is that if a portfolio component successfully builds its assigned deliverables, it can make its contribution to the chain that links the deliverables to the component outcome to benefit the value all the way to the organization's mission. So one of the questions a few weeks ago was about, we were talking about strategic plan, and can you show in your current organizations that your projects are linked to the strategic plan? For those of you in the DoD, for those of you in the US government, I think most of the comments were, nope, we almost never see those linkages, which is unfortunate. Again, the focus here is, if you're in a mature organization, if you have a mature portfolio, that you as the portfolio manager can keep reminding people about how the things that they're doing are tying back into the organization's mission. And again, this is one of those charts that it's relatively simple, but it has an important message that you can get lost in the minutia and forget about how important some of these things are. And again, for you as the portfolio manager, where you're actually looking over all of the components down below, you're the one that needs to be focused on the big picture. It's actually probably all right for the project managers to be focused on just that element that they're executing, but you need to be keeping your eye on all of these pieces coming together and forming the overall whole. All right, now we're on to assuring value. So the 4 approaches to confirming that the components will provide the anticipated deliverables. So tracing your requirements, validating your acceptance criteria, gated reviews, and quality assurance. So I know Michelle probably wants to talk about the first one, being a business analyst. Why don't we start with that one? So this will be a good opportunity for me not to talk for a minute or so. So how about, so Michelle, I don't want to pick on you, so say no if you don't want to answer this, but how do you see requirements tracing as being one of the approaches to confirm that it's producing the anticipated deliverables?
Yeah, so with every requirement, there should be an objective that it ties to, and those objectives would tie directly to the organizational strategy. And so there should be a very tight link all the way down from the strategy to the objectives and to every single minute requirement that you have for a project or program or portfolio.
Yep, and this is a good way to trace it too. You know, you wonder what the analysts spend all of their time doing. It's a big job to keep track of all these things. And again, even if they were on top of the entire thing, change is a given. You know things are going to keep changing. So again, imagine the poor analysts having to run around constantly redoing this master matrix to ensure that all these things are tied together. It's a tough job. You know, one of the things I wanted to point out, if you look at the third and the fourth, so gated reviews and quality assurance. So how many of you, let's do a quick show of hands, how many of you view these as positive things? It's 1, 2, all right, we see a lot of hands. So how many of you view these as negative things? That's good, all right, that's very good. Because in the project world, in the business world, whenever you throw out the word gate, people get a little worried. People think of gates as the barriers, the things that are going to slow you down, the things that aren't going to provide value. If you've delved into project management, program management, portfolio management, you'll realize there's a purpose there. There is a definite value add. But again, the gated reviews in particular, that's something you want to be very careful about using. You really need to make sure that any gates that you're throwing into the process are meaningful gates. Were any of you active during the CMMI world, or back when it was still just CMM? So back when I was working at US West decided that they were going to be CMM, which is, I've even forgotten what it stands for. But essentially it is about making sure that everything you do follows a process and goes through certain gates. It was very, very onerous. It was a big pain. And I can pretty much assure you that anybody that lived through that time at US West views that term gated with some suspicion, because you think back to that world where you can't do anything. You can't tie your shoe without filling out a form. So again, all things within reason, and gated in particular, that's the one I would encourage you just to make sure that any gates that are out there have value. Quality assurance is something that you always want to make sure is built into your plan. But again, just like requirements, if you've ever been in a world where you have an analyst that is focused on 100% documentation, everything is document, you're at that 100% point, you know, I've one of my directors said it recently. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, you know, perfection is the enemy of delivery, I think is what she
Progress.
said. Might have been progress too. Yeah, I've actually heard multiple examples of it. So quality assurance can be the same thing too. You can get so bogged down in the minutia of the test that you lose sight of what you're trying to do. So again, all things within reason. That's one of the reasons I like this slide, because it's a good reminder of these are all super, super important, but don't get focused on the 100% unless you're building something that requires it.
So quick thought on, I'm going back to the first one, requirements tracing. At the portfolio level, remember that requirements, you don't have to think of requirements as, you know, bottom level functional requirements, where most of us started as project managers, and a requirement tended to be something like the system will do this, or the building will be this big. Requirements can be, and often at the portfolio level are, business level requirements. They're like objectives, like Michelle said, it kind of hierarchically goes down. And so remember, semantically, when you're talking to portfolio stakeholders and you hear the word requirement, more often than not, they're thinking of something that's very big, not very tactical, and it's going to be tied to more of a business outcome than it is a end user outcome. So keep that in mind, and that helps with the traceability when you're talking to that level of stakeholder.
So your business requirement might be, hey, while the hood is open, why don't you swap out the ERP systems? As opposed to the requirement, which is this line should be blue versus green, which is what we used to see at the project level. All right, great point. Thank you, Jay. All right, moving right along. So now we're talking about realizing value. So portfolio value or performance is an aggregation of the value of the portfolio's components. And I should have put this next part in a slightly different shade of green, but you're actually, you know, one of the elements about portfolio that's important is that hopefully you're actually getting something more out of it than just the sum of the parts. And that's what they're talking about here with the synergy effect and the effects that occur from having the optimal mix of resources aligned with the portfolio components. So again, hopefully the portfolio level is actually adding value. If you look at the portfolio just as its components and you add all of those things up, hopefully the actual outcome of the entire portfolio is something even greater than all of those components. Again, it's the synergy. And now at the portfolio level, we're talking about the optimal mix of resources. And this isn't just people resources, these are all of your resources. So almost without exception, your resources are going to be limited. So you need to find the optimal mix of using those resources to achieve the value, to achieve your success criteria. And I think this is a good diagram. I'll encourage you just to look at this on your own rather than me spending a lot of time talking to it. But again, it's another good pictorial view of how you can be focusing on this. All right, finally, we're at reporting value. So reporting includes, but is not limited to risk reporting, costs required to achieve the outcomes, the reason for any shift in these costs, the cost synergies. Again, now you're looking at the portfolio level at the synergies that exists across the portfolio, the value achieved by the portfolio. Again, this one should just be in big flashing, look at that, my hand is actually flashing. Big flashing letters. What value are you achieving through the portfolio and the reasons for any shift in value? So if people are paying attention, and that can be a big if these are really busy people, but if people are paying attention and suddenly you're seeing the value proposition change or the cost structure change, they're going to ask some good key questions about that, and you need to be ready to answer those questions. And that's where having those already defined. All right, questions. That one went a lot quicker than the last one, but again, I wanted to save a lot of time for risk because there's some really good content in risk. So any questions on value?
So I'll throw in one quick observation is to summarize all that and tie it all together. Value, again, at the portfolio level is everything. Have active conversations with whomever your portfolio sponsor is. So you identify back in the stakeholder engagement, there's lots of stakeholders for a portfolio. Generally, there's one person who has P&L responsibility for where your portfolio rolls up into, and have a very solid relationship with that person, because you want to have active, and as Brent said, not just a status report, but an interactive conversation with that person to make sure you're constantly saying, hey, I feel like the value is good. Here's some supporting data, or I think we're trending in the wrong direction. The value is diminishing with the latest add to the portfolio, something like that. And that's a very valuable conversation to have, because it helps you do change control. It helps you steer, have conversations even further up to the board of directors or wherever that conversation may go. So active communication, interactive, and centered on value, watching that over time.
All right, great. Any other questions or thoughts about value management? All right, if not, then we have reached the point for the 10-minute break, and we're still going to do that even though we are all remote. So I'm showing 6:28. Does that jive with just about everybody else? All right, we'll do the 10-minute break. So everybody please be back at 6:38. Because Jay, if you can pause the recording so we don't have 10 minutes of dead space. We will be right back at 6:38 to start talking about risk management.
And we're back.
All right, welcome back to all the remote folks. We are diving right back into academic topics, portfolio risk management. So let me preface this section a little bit by saying I know we've talked about risk twice before. It came up in the Wysocki book. It certainly came up in the program management standard. So we're going to talk about it again. There's a lot of good content in this chapter. In fact, I have 13 slides and there's only one diagram in those 13 slides. So we're going to be focusing in on a lot of the key statements in this chapter. And obviously there are far more key statements here than there are quiz questions. So I really just want to emphasize all of the key nuggets within this section. We've already talked about some of them before. Again, risk spans all three levels of project, program, and portfolio. But I think there's a lot of key content here. You know, this is almost something that should be required reading for almost any project manager or somebody that's just interested in project management, because this chapter, I think, really brings it home well. And I don't say that about a lot of the things that the PMI puts out, but this is actually a good chapter, I thought, anyway. All right, let's focus on the first one. So risk management involves the identification, the balancing of risk factors to efficiently and effectively enable portfolio value delivery. So again, there's that word value again. Everything is tied back into value. So the dependencies among diverse risk factors result in emergent, oops, hold on. That is probably my furniture delivery for tomorrow. Let me pause just for a second. Sorry, Sears is calling to tell me when they're coming tomorrow, and if I don't answer, then they may choose another day. So I apologize about that. Ah, jeez. Hold on one second.
Who wants to do a soft shoe dance in the background? We could all do the wave and catch his attention. Like, yeah, there you go, Johnny. So when he comes back, we could all turn our backs on him, face the other way.
I think we're all out of order, but Jay, you're next to me. So if I did it and continued, it would go to you, then Michelle. But I think everyone's different.
All right, I'm really sorry about that. I'm back. Steph was gonna my wife was gonna grab the phone, but she got distracted by something else. So I apologize, and it wasn't even Sears. So again, I apologize. Okay, sorry, jumping right back into the bullet where we left off. So the dependencies amongst diverse risk factors result in emergent risks that require holistic portfolio risk management. Again, the emphasis here at the portfolio level, it's holistic. Everything is bubbling up strategically at the highest level. Therefore, a simple decomposition approach to risk management, as seen at the program and project level, is not appropriate when dealing with portfolio level risk factors. So again, what I like about this is they're emphasizing that it's not just the same risk section in every one of the guides, in the PMBOK and the program standard and the portfolio standard. If you felt like going back and comparing them all side by side, there are actually some key differences. And that's something that I would encourage you to do in your free time at some future point. If you want to go back, observe those differences and think about why those differences exist. But at the portfolio level, it's really more strategic and holistic. All right, so the objective of portfolio risk management is to meet the value proposition of the portfolio while aligning to an agreed upon confidence level and or portfolio risk level threshold through balancing both the threats and the opportunities. So again, fairly wordy, but now we're actually tying back into organizational confidence levels, organizational risk thresholds. Those are all things that without understanding those, how can you have a portfolio risk strategy? So this is really driving home at the portfolio level, you really have to understand those things. Most projects are very much focused at the tactical level at what's going to impact my particular project. But at the portfolio level, you have to understand what is your CEO's risk threshold? What is your CIO's risk threshold? For you as an organization, for you as a company, what are your risk thresholds? So I think this does a good job of emphasizing that. The following principles are central to risk management. So again, maximizing the portfolio value, there's that value word again. Fostering a culture that embraces change and risk. Now this is an interesting one because we haven't really talked about this too much before, but how do you see culture playing differently at the portfolio level versus what we've talked about previously at the project and the program level? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Yes, John.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of just similar to what a project is versus a portfolio. I mean, I guess the risk or culture at a project level might be just acceptance of a new feature or things like that, where culture at the portfolio level is really organizational culture, right? Is literally the momentum in which your organization is willing to move forward and take risk.
All right, good, thank you. Michelle, were you raising your hand or stretching? Stretching, okay, all right. So let me ask a follow-up question to this one.
Hey, Brent.
So how many?
Brent, I'll jump in there real quick on that last.
Yeah, please do.
You ask another question. Typically, the risk upside and downside, the high amplitude, high up and down, at the project level, it's a small amplitude because you're localized with what you can change. At the program level, if you have high risk at the program level, the impact can be greater than at the project level. And obviously at the portfolio level, if you have a highly risky output, whether that's a good risk or a bad risk, an opportunity or a threat, the magnitude tends to be so much bigger. So typically you get people who are risk averse and they start thinking system risk at the portfolio level because they start taking it a lot more seriously. They're willing to accept risk at a project or program level because it's sort of small and local. And you can have high risk components inside your portfolio that you can say, hey, this one might be a shooting star. This one might turn out to be a cow or whatever metaphors that you use in lots of portfolio theory. But when you mitigate that in terms of hedging it across a whole portfolio, you can you can get the risk to go down because you have enough coverage in terms of diversity of your items in your portfolio. But the risk goes way up because if your portfolio does happen to go belly up, the magnitude is way bigger than any given project. So think of it that way.
All right, thanks, Jay. So one other key point about when we're looking at culture, and culture is a tricky one because it's fairly nebulous, it's hard to pin it down. But most projects, when you're rolling it out, some change is happening. There's going to be some impact. But a lot of times at the project level, it may be fairly minimal. Your project may just be rolling out some back-end system and most people aren't even going to notice or necessarily even care about it. But generally at the portfolio level, people are going to notice it, people are going to care about it. So it becomes more and more important as you go from project to program to portfolio that you've made a plan for how you're going to manage this change. That organizational change management is something that you're focusing on throughout the project. So one of the supplemental reading articles that I posted out there for this lesson is on organizational change management. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I think it is a good introductory article. So this bullet point here, though, looking back at the slide, fostering a culture that embraces change and risk. That statement is at the organizational level, and that statement is very hard to do. You know, if you think about something that's already rolling down the hill, how easy it is to stop it. At the project level, it might be a pebble. At the program level, it might be a bowling ball. At the portfolio level, it might be an entire mountain rolling down the hill. It's really hard to stop that. So that's where organizational change management absolutely comes into play at the portfolio level, and figuring out how you're going to foster a culture that embraces change and risk, or try into that, or do your little part to try to make sure that happens, is really difficult. So it's great that they're calling that out on here, and I know they talk about it a little further, but this bullet point makes it sound a little easy. Oh, just go out and foster a culture that embraces risk and change. That is not easy. If you think back to 2 classes ago, the last time I was here, and we were talking about, you know, how many times have you been encouraged to take more risks? And how many times did that really not amount to anything, because it turned out that it was just the slogan of the month, as opposed to you're actually changing the culture of your organization to take more risks. And if you take more risks, it's okay. You're not going to get punished for actually doing that. This bullet point here, fostering a culture that embraces risk and change, super, super hard, and something that a portfolio manager may not be able to do. But your sponsor might be able to influence that. Your C-level executives may be able to influence. All the 3 that we're talking about at the project, program, and portfolio level, the portfolio level has the greatest chance of being able to influence that. All right. Portfolio risk management differs from project risk management in that the goal of risk management at the project level is to minimize threats and maximize opportunities. And again, these tend to be the more tactical threats and opportunities. So portfolios are concerned with maximizing the value of the portfolio. Again, we're coming back to that V word again. Tailoring the fit of the portfolio to the organizational vision, strategy, and objectives. So again, now we're tying the portfolio back to those things that are theoretically driving your entire organization for the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years. And then finally, determining how to balance the programs and projects within the portfolio given the organization's capacities and capabilities. So again, this is something that you see more at the portfolio level, because remember, just a little while ago, talking about value management, we were talking about getting the most out of your resources, and C here is tying right back into that. So how many of you see the distinction between project level and portfolio level? Does that look fairly clear to everybody? So I think as people are introduced to portfolio management for the first time, a lot of us came into it with the view of it at the project level. Oh, risks, I understand risks. I can hold a risk meeting. I have a risk log. At the portfolio level, you're really taking it to the next level, and you're thinking at the highest level. You know, I not very often have I had a project level risk log where we're talking about tying into the organizational vision, strategy, and objectives. I'm more focused on when all of my resources might disappear due to a holiday or something that comes up, those tactical level risks that might impact your project, or the chance that Congress may pass some new legislation, something along those lines. So it's an important distinction at this level. When you're talking portfolio level risk management, those are the things that you need to be focused on. And generally, you're going to let the project managers and the program managers be focused at those project level threats and opportunities. All right, a couple of more good quotes. The portfolio manager should balance the possibility of the technology failing, experiencing a program or project failure within the portfolio, with the potential of future profits. So this is a very specific example, obviously, but again, this is showing the more holistic view that the portfolio manager needs to have. Portfolio risk management also includes providing reserves, management, or contingency across the risk pool to cover both a portion, if not all, of the aggregate portfolio risks and the risks within the component programs and projects. So again, we're talking about the aggregation. So everything that's been done at the lower level is bubbling up at the higher levels. And so if all of the project managers, if you are a portfolio manager and all of your component managers are good, experienced managers, and they all are doing their risk planning and they all have their contingencies built in, if you add all that up, you're actually tacking something else on top of that at the portfolio level. So, but again, I think we talked about this earlier in the course. That's the one problem with bouncing around to a lot of different courses. The difference between padding and a reserve is really, really important, because the reserves, and especially the two that are noted here, these are calculated and these are visible. You know, the padding is just, well, I don't know for sure, I'm just going to throw in some extra time or some extra money. But when we're talking management and contingency reserves at the portfolio level, and really ideally at any level, those are all fully identified and tracked throughout the course of the portfolio. But again, this is something that's above and beyond, that's on top of all of those other things as well. Any questions on this one? All right. In other words, the portfolio management role in risk management is primarily to exploit the opportunity offered by the economies of scale and the trade-offs between components through the balancing of positive and negative risks. So there are two things I want to focus in on this line. First is the notion of the positive risks. So again, that's one of the articles that I threw out there. It's actually also one of the discussion questions for the week as well, is that I would encourage you to start thinking about both positive and negative risks. If you poll 100 people, odds are 99, if not 100 of those people are going to think of a risk as a negative, as a potential negative. But there are positives there too. And if you're actually on top of those positives, you can reap some big rewards at the portfolio and at the organizational level. So I wanted to point that out. Not all risks are negative. One of the risks that they talked about in the book was, hey, what if this product launch goes so well that we run out of stock? It would be really good if you've already got a plan in place for what are you going to do if that happens. I wouldn't consider that a negative risk, but I would consider it a negative if that happens and you're unprepared for it. Again, the second bullet here, the management reserve. So again, I wanted to focus again and clarify that the reserve and the management reserve at the portfolio level is a shared contingency for all of the components. And again, remember, components are programs, projects, and operations. That's one of the things that this standard doesn't do a good job about, is that operations sort of pops up occasionally, but it's in a very, very important element, because at the portfolio level, you're at the organizational level, and very, very few organizations don't have an operational component. Some of them may have outsourced their entire operational components, but it's a very, very rare organization, and you can't ignore that piece. So those are the key points that I wanted to highlight for this slide. All right, so what are the elements of risk management? And here's the one diagram that you're going to get in this chapter. So what makes up risk management at the portfolio level? It involves planning, identification of the risks, assessment of the risks, and then response to the risks. And the one thing I really wanted to point out on this diagram is the feedback loops that exist between these levels. Again, this is not a waterfall. This is not a sequence. You do this thing once and you never have to revisit it. good risk management, especially at the portfolio level like this, involves a lot of going back and forth because it's a changing world. Your organization might be changing, the economy might be changing, a lot of things might be changing. So you need to stay on top of this, and don't be afraid to go back. Again, none of these things should be carved in stone and just put on the shelf. You should keep revisiting them. Questions on this one? We're actually, we've got a more brisk pace than I was expecting, so we might be on pace to get done early. All right, 3 key again. These are 3 quotes that I thought were the most pithy of the quotes in the article. At the portfolio level, risks are usually not controlled. They are managed with a comprehensive strategy. So again, if you think about all the moving parts and what you're focused on at the portfolio level, it's really hard to control that. It's really hard to control it at the project level, but it can be done if the projects are appropriately sized. But at the portfolio level, you're mostly focused at the management of these and coming up with the overall risk strategy and then bubbling that down through all of your components. So risk associated with dynamic capacity is people-centric. So hopefully that makes sense. You can see the connection there. An organization's attitude towards risk and its risk appetite is based on the individual risk attitudes of those who work within the management structure. So again, this is it seems like a fairly straightforward statement, but think about what this is saying. How hard is it to pin down just a single person on their risk appetite? And then how much harder is it to pin down 5 people or 10 people or 15 people or 100 people? This isn't easy to do. And in general, what you have to do is prioritize. And I'll go back to Jay's story earlier where he was talking about his key stakeholder. So he is probably going to prioritize the risk appetite of that key stakeholder versus the other people that were in that meeting earlier today. Now, good. He's nodding his head. And again, in a lot of my projects in the past where I've been reporting directly to CIOs in the past, I take a lot of my approach to risk from the CIO. Again, I'm in IT, so generally the CIO is the head of my organization. So generally, I'm reliant on the CIO to be defining his or her appetite for risk, and I'm using that. But your sponsor in particular needs to be relaying to you what is the risk appetite that they see for the organization from the higher ups. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic on the CU campus right now. If you look at the 4 campuses, you've probably seen the advertising, 4 campuses combined, single vision, we're executing against this vision. The reality is a lot of the campuses go their own way. A lot of the 4 campuses, in fact, we have 5 different CIOs. And I can pretty much guarantee that if I wanted to get a single clear vision from those 5 CIOs, it may never actually happen. So you need to prioritize. In my case, I work in Boulder, so I am going to prioritize the feedback of my CIO versus the others. I certainly want to receive the input of the others, but if you have 5 different sets of input and they're all pointed in different directions, you're not going to go anywhere. You're just going to sit right there in the middle. So this is an important one, and it also emphasizes the difficulty of risk management at the portfolio level. Remember we were talking about the big cats a couple of weeks ago? Well, at the portfolio level, you're dealing with a lot of big cats. All right, and finally, what is important is the overall value delivered as a result of risk diversification in the portfolio mix. And again, this is just coming back to the portfolio. You're focused holistically across all of these things. And in some cases, an individual component might not see the big picture or see how they actually feed into the big picture. Ideally, they would, but they may not. But you at the portfolio level have to understand that. And ideally, you need to be able to communicate that, especially to your sponsor and key stakeholders. All right, a couple other key quotes here. Risk appetite is defined by risk thresholds, which become a measurable metric for the otherwise subjective risk appetite statement. And again, you're looking at a combination of risk thresholds. In the event that you have a very strong leader, you may be lucky enough to actually just have a single person define the risk threshold for the entire organization. But I can tell you in academia, where we're so much focused on consensus and everybody has their say, it's really, really difficult. But the appetite is the combination of these thresholds, the intersection of all these thresholds. So it's important for an organization to establish clear and agreed risk appetite statements in order to guide risk-based decision-making and to set the scope for overall risk management activities. Again, if you have a strong leader or you have an aligned leadership team, you're going to be in much, much better shape. Because then all you have to do is look at those thresholds, understand the appetite, and then make sure that your portfolio risks are aligned with that. But if you're in a very consensus-driven or in an organization where every single leader is going every which way, it's a lot more difficult. And then finally, most risk management at the portfolio level involves setting of the organization's risk culture as defined by the risk appetite of senior executives and subordinate managers. And again, it's probably unfortunate that PMI just keeps coming back to the managers, because it really is ultimately going to be more than that. You know, I've worked with many, many managers in the past that probably don't have a really good feel for the appetites of their subordinates or their organization. And especially when you're talking culture, the culture is far more than just the leaders and the managers. But again, if you were to take any of the PMI certifications, odds are they're going to be focused right in on, oh, it's just the managers, it's just the supervisors. But again, the practical reality for all of you, and I'm assuming you've all probably seen this either in your current organizations or the previous organizations, you know, the leadership might point the way. They say, here's where we want to go, but they don't really fully define the culture throughout the entire organization. And especially once we talk organizational change management, it's actually the intersection of the definitions being pushed from above and the appetites and understanding and thresholds from below. It's the intersection and the combination of those things. All right, a couple more quotes. Uncertainty is greatest at the portfolio level because of the impact of uncontrolled variables on the portfolio. And again, we've talked about this, or I've sort of chipped away at this a couple of times in each of these academic sessions so far. Again, projects tend to be simpler than portfolios, tend to be simpler than portfolios. Project, program, portfolio. I think I said portfolio twice. Should have been program in the middle there. So at the portfolio level, you have a lot of uncontrolled variables. So projects and programs might be shielded from some of those variables. And in fact, I would say, but here I'll also ask Jay to weigh in on this, I would say that part of the job of a good portfolio manager is actually to help shield those component managers from some of those things. Jay, do you have any thoughts on that?
Totally agree. I mean, you're shielding your children. You know, if you're a portfolio manager, your children are your projects and your programs are your children and your grandchildren, essentially. I wouldn't disagree with that first bullet, but I would add that as a portfolio manager, you also have an ability to hedge things across diversification. So uncertainty is greatest at the portfolio level. I get that for sure, but you can mask uncertainty by having things that go in different directions. Just like in a financial portfolio, you can have equity stocks or you can have fixed income, and those two things tend to move in opposite directions. So you hedge your bet, in other words. And you can do that at the portfolio level, anticipating uncertainty, so that some ships are going up, some ships are going down, but you keep a level portfolio total or portfolio value, even though the components inside might be more dynamic, moving up and down. And that, in most cases, is seen as a positive for people who provide funds. And part of that is us protecting your projects or your components as they're defined as by the PMI, to let them move ahead, control their own risks, and stay away from the noise that's at the system level.
Great, thank you, Jay. The second quote on here, individuals make up the organization, and it is through the combination of individual risk perspectives and risk appetite that an organizational risk attitude or risk culture is formed. And again, that's why this becomes so difficult at the portfolio level, is that things almost get exponentially harder the more people are actually weighing in on these decisions on these things. You know, I have been part of organizations in the past with really strong, determined leadership, and they force their will on the rest of the organization. That makes it a lot easier for you. But most of us don't live in the world, especially if you're in academia or the nonprofit side, you generally don't have that. So again, you have to understand the culture, you have to understand the organizational dynamics that you're in, and come up with a strategy that matches that culture. All right, some more good quotes. Planning is the key to successful portfolio management. I'm really hoping this one is obvious to all. This is not a quiz question, although it probably should have been. We come back to this time and time again. And again, as the levels, as you go from project to program to portfolio, planning just gets more and more important throughout. And at the portfolio level, it's absolutely key. The portfolio risk management plan should fit into the overall portfolio risk management framework. Again, that makes sense because PMI likes to nest all these things within other larger plans, but that's a pretty obvious linkage there. Then finally, the portfolio risk management plan does not contain risk analysis, but it provides the structure for risk-related data management. So again, in this case, it's talking about, the way that I view this is more of the lower level, the more tactical risk analysis, rather that you've defined strategically how this will be done, and then the components within the portfolio will do that tactical level risk analysis. That's how I'm reading this one. All right, here we're back to some more green text. So again, just this one is just one long statement, and I apologize, but this is a really good statement, and I wanted to make sure we covered it in class. At the program or project level, or when dealing with operations, again, thankfully they actually included operations in the statement, the focus is on management of negative risks through avoidance, transfer, or mitigation, as well as the management of the positive risks, the opportunities through exploration, sharing, or enhancement. So again, for all of you that have taken 50/30, we covered that in the risk management chapter in that particular class. You know, you look at all the negatives, you define for each of those key negatives or the potentially negative risks. Are you going to avoid it? Are you going to transfer it? Are you going to mitigate it? There are a couple other ones as well, but usually people don't talk about those. And again, positive risks, assuming that you're in a mature organization where you're actually managing the positive risks, you would identify those positive risks and then decide if you want to explore them, to share them, or enhance them. This is all tactical level risk management. Now at the portfolio level, the focus should be on balancing the positive and negative risks to support the organizational vision, strategic goals and objectives of the organization, thus realizing the value to the organization. So those are all of the usual terms that we've been reading in the portfolio standard. But the term I want to key in on this one here is the balancing. So again, if you understand the risk, let me try that again. Risk thresholds, you understand the risk thresholds for the organization, and so you understand what your constraints are. As a portfolio manager, you can do a little bit of balancing. If one of your components is highly, highly risky, it might be okay to do that because it's balanced out by some of these other ones that aren't as risky, or these other ones that actually have pretty good opportunities to actually exploit. So the project managers or the program managers in these components are really focused, oh my gosh, I've got so many negatives, or hey, look at all the positives that I've got. It might be okay when it all bubbles up and everything sort of evens out at the portfolio level. In fact, at the portfolio level, ideally, it's not only going to even out, but it's probably even slightly positive, skewed to the positive side. So in general, especially if there are a lot of components, you can probably take more risks in some of the components because it's balanced out by some of the areas that are not nearly as risky. As Jay was just talking about, if stocks are down, you've got bonds on the other side. All of your eggs are not in one basket. So again, this one statement, extremely valuable statement about risk management at the portfolio level. All right, on the positive side of risk, organizations may exploit, enhance, or share a positive risk. When dealing with an increased product demand, for example, the risk response actions would usually be part of a planned portfolio strategy or marketing effort. And again, this is a good problem to have, but if you haven't planned for it, then it's just a problem. You know, if you look back historically about product launches that might have been risky or might have been an unknown or might have been a new sector, and so you launch this product and suddenly everybody wants it. The iPhone 1, you know, long lines, everybody suddenly wanting it. What were those dolls back in the 80s? Is it Cabbage Patch Kids? Does anybody remember those? Again, they launched them and everybody went crazy. I actually remember my aunt telling me a story about women getting into a fist fight because the store got 5 of these things and there were 10 women that wanted it, and it was a full-on brawl that actually ensued. So I can pretty much guarantee in most of these cases, they were not planning for the reaction that they actually got. If they had actually done this level of analysis and prepared for it, they could just execute the plan. Oh my gosh, look at this. People are fist fighting over our dolls. Let's execute plan beta. And they go off and do it. But if they haven't done that, then it's suddenly a fire drill to actually try to figure out how are you going to produce more of these things. And guess what? The materials probably aren't available. And guess what? Your staff is tired from the launch and they're all on vacation. That's why you want to be focused on the positive and the negative risk, especially at the portfolio level. Because these are the things that can make or break the company or the organization.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
It just made me think of how the toilet paper manufacturers probably did not have this positive risk in their portfolio risk management plan to increase production in the event of a pandemic.
I would say that's probably a fair assessment. And I'm not in the toilet paper industry, but I'm not sure that would have even occurred to me, especially since it's not even directly related to the pandemic. It's an irrational response to a different trigger. But you're right, there's a great point. So just imagine if they had actually done this analysis. Let's say there are 10 major producers of toilet paper. One of them had done this analysis. One of them had a plan in place. They are going to see, they would be, I don't know if any of them actually did that, but think about the opportunity, think about the profits they could achieve if they actually had done that analysis. Lauren, did you have a question or a thought?
Yeah, they actually interviewed some toilet paper manufacturers, and I don't know if they thought of it ahead of time, but they kind of said, no, we're not going to increase production because this is a temporary thing, and for them to increase production, they would have to increase other assets, and this is going to level back out. So yeah, society kind of created this problem because we're not using toilet paper any faster,
right.
Buying it faster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is one of those things where I'm not sure anybody would have actually put the pieces together to get to this, because I'm not even sure how we got to this. I got back from Arizona and suddenly there was no toilet paper in the state of Colorado. And I'm like, what happened here? It was already gone by the time I got back. I had to order some on eBay. It's ridiculous. So thank you, Michelle. That was a very good example. And thank you, Lauren, for that too, because I think in this case, they might have already done the planning, or they didn't do the planning and they looked at it and they're actually thinking ahead. Yeah, the knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, we need to crank up production. Well, guess what? There's already millions of rolls in warehouses around the world. We don't necessarily need more production. We just need this stuff to get from the warehouses to the shelves. So maybe they do something to emphasize that as opposed to increasing production. So in this case, I'm encouraged to hear thoughts like that, because I think historically the knee-jerk reaction might be, oh my gosh, people, we're sold out everywhere, produce more, without thinking a little farther ahead. I don't know a lot about it, but I remember just a couple of years ago, fidget spinners. So I have a feeling a lot of executives said, these are really popular. This is the hula hoop of the 2010s, produce more fidget spinners. And within probably 3 months, those were dead and lame. And then, they were just lying on the street corners too. So if your knee-jerk reaction is just produce a lot more fidget spinners, you're probably left over with a lot of scrap metal. Hopefully they at least recycled the fidget spinners. That was one of those phases that I just never got from day one, but one of my stepsons loved his fidget spinners. All right. The portfolio risk management plan is a component of the portfolio management plan. And the key reason that I wanted to point this out again is that PMI is very good about nesting these things, but it does the nesting with a purpose. Again, if you think about the 10 knowledge areas, if you just look at project management as a whole, it can get pretty overwhelming. If you start focusing in just on an individual knowledge area, usually you can look at it and go, okay, I can do that. That makes sense. I can do that. And then you go to the next one, then you go to the next one. So again, what they're talking about here is that you've got an overall portfolio management plan. Again, there's that P word again for portfolio and planning go hand in hand. You have a portfolio management plan, and then the risk management plan is just part of that. It describes how the risk management activities will be structured and performed within the portfolio. So again, this is design level stuff for the most part. It's not the tactical analysis of the risks. It also includes references to the risk management guidelines, policies, and procedures that define the organizational risk strategy and appetite. So ideally at the portfolio level, the portfolio manager is the one that's done the work to actually confirm what the organizational risk strategy and risk appetite is. Because without understanding that, how can you communicate that back down into the components? So it behooves the portfolio manager to try to go out and find these things. Again, if you can't get a definitive answer, you're just going to have to make an educated guess or prioritize your inputs. But your component managers, your project managers, and your program managers are going to be looking for that advice, that input, so that it's actually an aligned strategy instead of every project going every which way. This project super, super risky. This project is super, super safe. And maybe neither of those are the right approach because the risk threshold is actually in the middle there. All right, believe it or not, that is all 13 slides on risk. So the remainder is going to be on the final project and then some administrative updates. Before we jump into that though, any final questions about risk or any final thoughts about risk? Is everybody risked out at this point? This is the third time we've covered it. All right, if that is the case, I am going to stop the share. Jay will resume the share, and then he's going to be talking about our fun final project.
Okay, thank you. Let me share. Get over to my Zoom item here. Okay, did that come through for everybody? All right, and this is the reason I wore my neon yellow shirt, because after all that risk, I want everybody to wake up so we can talk about the final project. So you'll hear me say this a few times throughout the description of the final. I'm going to ask everybody to put on their creative hat, and where there's missing data, fill in the data yourself. So we'll see this mentioned a few times, but I want you to use your creative liberties in taking a limited set of data that is in the packet, which we'll post here in about an hour, and fill in the gaps as needed. And I'll explain that here in the slides coming up. So let's push ahead. I can get so we walked ourselves from introduction, learned that it was a case study. We learned a little bit about the participants in this company Triumph. And here we are today with some details about the assignments and the requirements for what you need to submit. And I'll preface by saying that there's a packet that will be on Canvas here after 8 o'clock that you can download that has all these slides plus all the data slides in them, and you can reference those. And then we'll talk about this again at the class after spring break. So as we mentioned before, the case study takes place at a company in the IT department that is getting ready to do their annual planning process. And for the sake of the project, we can say it's the 2021 annual planning. And you can either pretend that their fiscal year starts, imminently, or you can pretend that it's really like October of this year and you're planning for next year. The key is that the exercise flexes the people that participate, the characters that participate as they work through the annual planning process. So there's a few slides here about that process. It's not germane, but it's to the actual assignments, but it does help set the context. So for Triumph, their annual planning process consists of the following phases: demand capture, followed by portfolio analysis, and then portfolio approval. And so we'll follow that process as well in the final project, and we'll talk about how each of those unfolds here. But I would like you to know that annual planning is at the epicenter of portfolio management. So we talked about this a few times throughout the semester, but there's certain business cycles where you adjust things in a portfolio, and annual planning is the top of those. You can imagine that's when budgets are set. That's when you go through a laundry list of what's in flight, what new stuff can be added. You look at risk, you look at stakeholders, changes in stakeholders, and so forth. So the annual planning process is like 2 months, or it depends on where you're working. It could be 3 months or 4 months or 2 weeks, but it's a very intensive period for the portfolio manager to take part in it and prepare for. So that's why the case study focuses in on annual planning. All right, so I'm gonna move my windows here so I can see the slides that I'm showing you guys, because it was not working where I had my window. So the demand capture consists of identifying your business areas. If you don't know them already, then you engage with those business areas. You become aware of the demand for each area. And then finally, you capture their demand. And so for the sake of this particular final project, we're only going to focus in on the demand capture. So there's no exercises that say, go find what business areas are in scope. That's why I put in place the characters that we reviewed for 3 weeks ago. Those are the characters that are germane to this particular exercise. So we won't worry about 1, 2, and 3. It'll just be a collection of requests from the business and the IT department into the IT portfolio for analysis. Does that make sense to everybody? So I guess I'll also pause here and say that I fully anticipate, Brent and I were talking about this before class, you're going to have lots of questions on this. This is beta version of this concept. I mean, Brent and I talked about this last summer, and we said, hey, this would be a great thing to do. And it kind of came together a little bit with Spit and Bubblegums, and you guys are sort of the first, you are the first group to use it. And so I think it's a great concept, but it's not bulletproof yet. I'm sure there's some mistakes in terms of formatting and content and approach, and I would absolutely love to have some feedback. Brent and I were talking about that the other day. So bear with me, there might be a few bumps along the way, but and questions. Jump in with questions. I can't see all of you on the screen, so just unmute yourself and jump in if you do have a question, and we'll have time at the end as well. All right, so that's demand capture. That's the first one, and as it says there, we'll look at just a collection of requests. So let's take a look real quickly at what the request template looks like. So this is obviously a very abbreviated request form that we're going to use. You can see here that there's risk. Brent has me thinking risk now. So there's request identification. So there's some information that identifies this particular, any given request. And one little commentary here, a request number may seem like a trivial piece of information. And in our case, they're just numbered 1 through 5 and 1 through 10. But it's hugely important in the real world, because as you work with requests over time, the names of those requests could change. The requester could change, the objectives could change, and the data in the tool for those pieces of metadata could be changing all over the place. And so as you talk to one stakeholder who you hadn't talked to in 3 weeks, and you say, oh, it was project XYZ, and they're like, what is this? Because to them, it's project ABC. But the one thing that should never change is the request number. So get in a good habit of at least making sure you have consistent static request numbers. And that's just a little side commentary. For each request, we'll get a set of objectives. These are the business objectives or the objectives of the requester. And then there's some information around justification. This is hugely important at the portfolio level. Again, at the portfolio level, a lot of times you're asking the question, what should we do? There's way more to do than we can actually accomplish, so we have to say no to some things. And you use the justification metadata to make that decision in a lot of cases. And again, this is a simplified version, but we'll have a problem statement, a benefit statement, and I'll challenge Brent. He said we'd see value in all these slides. We might actually see benefits just as much. That word, if we took the word salad out, that benefits might be right up there with value. And then there's risk. And it's specifically risk of delay, because at the portfolio level during annual planning, you're not necessarily asking some of the risk items about implementation. That is certainly important. But the first thing you want to understand is the risk of avoidance, or what happens if we don't accept this particular request. And so that is germane to this assignment as well. Then there's some schedule information provided by the requester, a start date, requested start date, and a requested completion date, and then the all-important cost. So there's a project execution value, and then there's also this annual operations value, which is also very important when you get into advanced portfolio, when you start looking at how does any particular component in the portfolio, once it's done, how does it affect my budget ongoing, my sustainable operating budget. And oftentimes if this gets neglected, you get shocked, because you put in place a big program, you get out the back end of the process and you put this into production, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, my operational costs are quite significant and we didn't put those in the budget, and then you're in trouble. So it's a very good idea to have a question about asking annual operations costs. And from the requester, they may not know that, but if you don't get it, you can certainly query for it. So a couple quick things about it. Each request is the voice of the customer. You can take the data that's in the packets to be accurate. There are no gotchas with inaccurate data, but that is something out here in the real world you have to worry about. People who submit things will consciously fabricate them, and it's just human nature. They'll make it look better than it is. They'll make it look cheaper than it is, or it will be. They'll make it look faster, less riskier. They want it approved, so they will make it nice and glossy. And your job as a portfolio manager is to challenge that. We don't do that in this exercise. You can take all this information as granted correct. And then, of course, we'll use the data in the requests to complete the assignments in the portfolio section. So any questions on the request form? Pretty abbreviated. Keeping an eye on the time here. All right, pushing ahead. So the second phase of annual planning is portfolio analysis. Typically, this involves creating a business case. We talked about that both at the program level and at the portfolio level. It's important here. Then you do business case analysis. Again, these are generic processes, but these are per individual. So as you look at business cases, you turn a request into a business case. That's at the individual level. And that is a good piece of analysis, but it's never sufficient. At the portfolio level, you're always worried about what do things look like at the system level. And so you need to put a system view together. And that's where things like bubble charts and so forth come in very handy, where you can take pieces of metadata from the request that you calculate or you derive in the business case and help you make a decision. So in this case, you see bread and butter, white elephant, oysters, pearls, measuring things like what is the probability of success, how much is it going to cost, how much effort, risk, so forth. Pick any two variables you want. You can put these on a 2x2 grid, and they will help inform which ones are obvious must picks and which ones are obviously must reject. And that's a good thing, and obviously it applies in our final project as well. So for the sake of the final project, we will limit business case creation and analysis to the single component of a business case, which is strategic alignment. As we talked about before, business cases have 10 or 12 sections. We're only going to talk about strategic alignment. So it's a one pager. It's a one section of the business case. We don't have to fill out the whole business case like we would if this were we had more time.
So Jay,
No, go ahead.
are we going to be doing that strategic alignment part of the business case for each one of the requests?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll see that here in just a slide. Good question, and we will. All right, so the third part of, I'm sorry, so here's the answer to your question. So for each request, you need to score, how does this request align to the 5 top strategic objectives of Triumph at the company, at the business level. So if you remember back to those slides where we had the Hubble Space Telescope and it was the dark slides and it said our number 1 objective is to deploy the Omega product on Hubble. The second one is to, you can see them here, I paraphrased them so that they'll fit in this table. But you must complete for all the business requests an alignment score and then provide a rationale for that score for each of the business requests. So you do score alignment to strategy, and then similarly, the portfolio in IT will get requests from within IT itself. IT tends to submit things into its own portfolio because they have to keep the lights running, the lights on, keep the business running. And for those, you would score them, or you will score them, not against the business objectives, but against the IT strategic objectives for the year, and those are listed here at the bottom. And we talked about this a little bit, but we can be explicit. So when you do score these, the instructions are to use one of the 5 items here. You can't pick, you shouldn't pick anything that's in between. If you do, you can justify that, but it'll make your life a lot more complicated, and this is a pretty simple final exam. So use these 5 criteria. If one of the requests aligns very positively an extreme amount to one of these strategic objectives, you put extreme in the field there, and then you justify it with some words of your own choosing, referencing the data from the requests. So you will get a series of requests, and then you'll turn that into an abbreviated business case by scoring it for strategic alignment. It's a slim version of a business case. All right, the third part of the annual planning is the portfolio approval. Typically in industry, this goes like as follows. You come up with some sort of portfolio, like you can see an example here with this picture, and you say, this is the portfolio I want. You submit it to the powers that be. They give you feedback, which is almost always, you're asking for way too much money. Go back to the drawing board and find ways to do less, or do the same amount with less money, something to that effect. Those are real circumstances. You make an adjustment, you resubmit it, and eventually you negotiate some sort of final portfolio approval. And again, for the final project, we're just going to focus on what you submit. We're not going to bother with any sort of activities around some sort of feedback where Brent and I play some sort of governing finance body or anything like that. The project culminates with you submitting what you want to have as your portfolio. And that'll make sense here in just a couple slides. So those are the 3 phases. And then we can look at the assignments. So we've talked about the assignments for a couple of weeks now. There's an assignment at the portfolio level. This is assignment 1. And this, as you can see in the table here, there's going to be 4 pieces to this assignment. The first is identifying the strategic alignment. And so just reading these for each business request, you have to complete the business strategic alignment table that we saw a couple slides ago. And for IT requests, you complete the IT table. And for each of those, you can earn a point. So there'll be a template in the packet that's on Canvas where you identify that. I've put the request and the strategic alignment table on the same page. So you just get the request and you fill it in right there if you have PowerPoint. You must provide both an alignment score and rationale. And you can be brief to get the point. And then I put here, most alignment scores will be accepted if you have a valid rationale. We admit that portfolio management and scoring strategic alignment is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the evaluator. Different people will score things differently. So don't worry about it being right or wrong as a score. Worry about rationalizing why you voted that way, why you did that. And so again, it's a point each, just it'll be pretty obvious. Score it and provide a reason. Second item is you have to decide for each request, are you going to accept this request into your portfolio or are you going to reject it? And so it's on the same template with the request and the scoring of strategic alignment. There's a field there to say, I accept this or I reject it. The key here for these 5 points is that there are some requests that must be selected and there are some requests that must not be selected. If you identify these 5 requests correctly, and I'm not going to tell you what ratio that is, you will get a point each for identifying the correct decision. So some part of this is subjective and part of this is using common sense. And so in this case, any other requests, you can see there's 5 that are scored must have or must not. The other 5, because there's 10 requests, can be accepted or rejected to your discretion with no risk for any points. You can fill in however you want. And one final note there that the full budget, which we'll talk about here in a minute, does not have to be fully allocated to your portfolio. You just have to justify your decision, which is in the next assignment right here, about the rationale. So for each request, you're either going to say, I accept this request into my portfolio, or I reject it. And then there's a space for you to add about 8 lines of open text, and you just fill it in using your own words, using business decisions, whatever you want to put in there. Again, looking for your thought process here, not necessarily whether the answer is right or wrong. I really want to see that you're looking at things at the system level or looking at risks and dependencies between components of the portfolio. And finally, write up a summary that identifies 3 key components. You can identify more, but there's 3 key components to earn points. You have to describe how does your portfolio that you're requesting address Triumph's strategic goals. So if you address that, you'll get 5 points. If you address the cost, you have to say why are you choosing to spend the amount that you've identified? And you can get 5 points for that. And then risk, as we just spent a good chunk of today talking about risk, we want to know what risks are emergent in your selected portfolio. And again, this is open words for you to put in there. There's a page for each, and we'll see that in the template, or when you go download the template, you can see the field for that. So let me pause there, and then we'll move on to the other assignment. Are there any questions about that? I can't see everybody's face, so I don't know if anybody's raising their hand. Just jump in if you have any questions. All right, this will make a lot more sense when you see the form here. So
Jay?
Go ahead.
Can I ask you to go back to that chart real quickly, please? Thank you. So on 1.2, the second bullet there, so there's, it'll be evident. Okay, so there'll be 10 total, and we have to use our judgment and provide the rationale for which 5 make the cut and which one fall off.
So there's 10 requests, and there are 5 requests that have correct answers of either accept or reject. Not meaning that 5 of them have to be accepted, but there are 5 requests that when you look at them and you apply portfolio, everything you've learned, you will decide this particular request is either a no-brainer accept or a no-brainer reject. And I'm not telling you whether there's 2 or 3 or 1 or 4 or 5 and 0. You got to get those right. And it's a whole 5 points out of 500 for the semester. So don't worry too much about it. But I have every confidence you guys will get these right. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep. Okay, so at the program level, I'm going to go through these quickly. Again, we talked about program. This totals up to 25 points instead of 40. We went back and we looked at all the areas of program that we studied, the performance domains and so forth, and I'm just going to go through these quickly. You will take one of the programs that you accept into your portfolio. There is an assumption that you accept at least one request, and I think that's a fair assumption. But take one of the programs that requests that you're going to turn into a program and execute on, and for that program, diagram the program hierarchy. So define how many child projects you think it needs, what are the objectives of those projects, talk about inter-project dependencies. There's, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's some creative liberties here. The request data is very light. It doesn't give you enough information to go in and, detail this as if you had a whole set of requirements. So use some creative liberties to draw a diagram and say, my program has, 3 projects and they're going to do these types of things. And again, this is 5 points. It's not a big deal. And then similarly, going back to what we had in, I think, lesson 7, where we were talking about the program life cycles, identify the program life cycle, provide target completion dates on the assumption that you're starting this program on January 1st. You can start it whenever you want, but just say, I fully intend to get through phase 1, if you remember what that is, by March or whatever. And again, not necessarily looking for a right or wrong answer. I'm looking for your thought process on each of these. And then what is the exit criteria to move from the 3 phases of the program life cycle? Project managers, what characteristics are you looking for in choosing a PM for each of your projects? And then what aspects of a selected or approved program drive a PM choice? Again, these are open-ended worded answers. Think about what you would do as a program manager, and you just got handed this program that was accepted into the portfolio. Now you have to go deliver this. So put your lessons 5, 6, and 7 hat on and go assess what you would do to create a program that you can execute by identifying project managers. And again, thought process here, not looking for any particular right or wrong answer. Use rationale about how you would make these decisions. Similarly, governance, select a steering committee for your program from the Triumph personnel based on the request that you've turned into a program. Who are your SteerCo members? Who are you going to go to and say, we need a governing body for this program? Who's it going to be in the little bios that you saw a couple classes ago? Similarly with stakeholders, identify stakeholders, again, from the list of Triumph personnel, and these can be individuals. You don't need to identify groups or put them in groups. And then for each one, provide an assessed level of influence, their preferred communication, and the alignment to the cause. Because you can have stakeholders that might be detractors. Again, creative liberty here. Make it up however you want to do it. Say, my stakeholders are, this person, these 2 or 3 people, whatever it is, and have some fun with it and say, one of my stakeholders is this person from the list of characters, and this person loves the program for the following reasons. Financials, how and why are you going to allocate the program budget to the identified projects? We have about 15 minutes left. So you will have a budget assumed to be the cost of the request. As I said, the data in the request can be taken to be accurate. We are not in the circumstance where the business asks for something at X and the IT department comes back and says it's really 1.5X, and then you get an approved budget of 1.25. We're going to take the amount that's in the request, and that is the amount of the program budget. And how do you want to cut that up for your projects inside? Put a communication plan together. Brent was just talking about that around the importance of communication in risk management as well as stakeholder communications and engagement. There's data in the standard around the components of a communication plan. Reference that. Come up with an easy communication plan about how you intend to do things like what roles, what information is required, how often, frequency of meetings, and so forth. Again, creative liberties, just get a little creative there. And finally, you can't have anything with program without the word benefits in there. So what are the benefits of your program? Define the benefits in business terms. That's a key. You can, but you shouldn't have a program that just says things like, I'm going to generate less lines of code. That doesn't mean anything to a business person. It might be a very important outcome, but it can't be a benefit to somebody who's paying for that item. So think of it in terms of business terms. How are those benefits delivered, and how do you ensure that they are sustainably operationalized? We talked about that a few lessons ago as well. So I expect there'll be some questions on this. We'll have some fun with it. We can interact via email. There's more slides coming, but just as a matter of approach, know that you can ask questions of either Brent or myself via email. Bring questions back in lesson 11. After spring break, we'll have plenty of time. We have quite a bit of open time in the lesson class time. So we can probably take a half hour or so, split over a couple lessons to talk about any questions and answers that we need to on these. Let's push ahead to project real quick and we'll look at some of that data. There's the note that says creative liberty. Use your imagination to fill in missing information, because the requests are very, very thin. I mean, it's a light request. And finally, project, there's only 5 of these. Pick a project within the program that you approved. Put a project lifecycle in there. Why are you choosing that project lifecycle? Are you going to run it agile? Are you going to run it hybrid? Are you going to run it waterfall? Whatever. Why? What characteristics were relevant to your decision? Again, you'll have to make up some data here based on some assumptions, but again, looking for thought process. Work breakdown structure. I mean, this is going back to 50-30 for the most part, but you put a WBS in there. Come up with a schedule for your project. Identify a start date, some milestones, and a completion, and then justify your chosen dates in 2021 based on the requested dates from the requester who is requesting dates at the program level. So your project fits in that program. Fill in the dates for your project. Financial, what elements will drive cost in your project? Do you have, how will you manage costs against your budget? What kind of variance cycle do you want to have? Again, in the packet that you download, there's more information about each of these in the template that you have to fill out. I'm summarizing here for the presentation, but when you look at the packet, there's a little bit more detail. And then finally, how do you prevent your project from becoming distressed? If you think way back to lesson 4 or something, wherever we were, it seems like a lifetime ago, but how do you prevent your project from becoming distressed? And if it did become distressed, what is your plan? So looking ahead, risk mitigation, big part of project program and portfolio management. So put some ideas around that. All right, so that's the 3 assignments. That adds up to 90 points. Again, creative liberty there. Presentation is 10 points. This is easy. You guys will do wonderful at this. In your presentation, present information about all your assignments. You get a point for each. Feels so light to say a point for a whole assignment, but if you summarize that. And then the quality of your materials, make sure your materials that are in your presentation are at the executive steerco level. You're making this recommended portfolio to a presumed, you're submitting it to a finance governing body or something. You're asking for this money, so make it quick. Don't put in too much detail. Make it easy to read. And finally, you will have 7 to 10 minutes to make your presentation. Finish your presentation. Don't take less than 7 because there's a lot of data here, and don't take more than 10. You don't have to cover point by point everything that you answered in all your assignments, but pick the salient points out. Make it count the time you have. We will not ask questions during those 7 to 10 minutes. So you want to finish on time and you'll get your points, 2 points. And then there'll be a 5-minute Q&A period afterwards. And that can go long. That's not at your control. So there's no penalty if it goes long or short. And then we had to have 1 point in here to make sure everybody doesn't take Jay's pension for saying And yeah, so don't follow my lead, make it better, be better than me. All right, that's the 100 points. There's a num right there. Let's look ahead. We got 3 more slides and then we'll open it up for questions. So the requests, I'm going to go through these quickly. So I've summarized them into 5 business requests and then 5 IT requests. And the full requests are in the packet that you can download. These are just the lists. So in the list, we have program Cartwheel. It comes from our CEO. And that is to expand the research and development team by 30 resources with the purpose of building an RFP for an add-on to the DoD Next Generation Classified Satellite Program. And I forget the amounts. I have to drag the Zoom window out of the way. So our CEO wants $4.5 million for that. Our CFO is asking for program Snowdog to convert the existing product Clean Room for use in building a prototype for James Webb Space Telescope. So if you remember back to the strategic objectives for the company in the next year, one of them was to win a contract for James Webb, and he would like $3.7 million. Program Javelin is to build an improved vibration lab to perform the required testing of the Omega product to meet NASA specifications. And our operating officer wants $6.3 million to do that. Program Tango comes from our CEO. He would like a mobile phone app to facilitate covert dating between industry executives, and he would like $200,000 to do that. Program Magellan open a regional headquarters in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and a modern manufacturing facility in Hyderabad, India. And they would like $4.9 million. So you can see the business side of the house is asking for $19.6 million worth of work from the IT department. That's just the IT costs that are relevant to your portfolio. On the IT side, we have 5 requests, and our CIO, Grace Hopper, is asking for $4.6 million to move the corporate IT department to a new location with modern amenities for the IT personnel. Our security director wants program Countdown to implement an information management data hierarchy program to categorize and safeguard Triumph data, and he would like $2.2 million. Our intrepid infrastructure director, Leonardo da Vinci, would like $1.7 million to move the enterprise storage array to a secure cloud service. That's program Xanadu. Program Frisbee is to instantiate a strategic portfolio office, and it is submitted by Jane Goodall, who is our portfolio manager. And she would like $900,000 for that. And finally, program Wheezy Popper is to open a research and development facility in Aspen, Colorado, submitted by Beaker, who is our innovation director, and he would like $11.3 million to open a new research and development facility in Aspen. So the IT department itself is submitting $20.7 million worth of requests. So you have 10 requests into your portfolio, and here's the all-important budget information. So as we saw, about 20 from inside IT, about 20 from outside IT. And does anybody have a predictive guess before I click the button and tell you how much your budget is? Michelle, are you saying I have a guess, or are you saying $5 million?
I'm saying 10.
Yeah, no, I can only see one hand. I scrolled the window off the screen. All right, that's a good guess. Anybody else?
15.
15. Do I hear 20? Do I hear 25? Brent, guess? Brent's seen it, so he knows. So the answer is you have $20 million. So this is, I won't say this is typical, because usually the ratio is even worse. Usually the ratio is about 3 or 4 to 1, depending on how deep you stretch your demand outreach program. If you're looking for like ideas that are just not well thought of and you include those, you could get 5 to 1 in terms of the ratio of requested cost to the amount of money that you have for one cycle. In this case, it's 2 to 1. So you're going to have to make some choices. You obviously can't accept everything. You'll have to make some choices, and you'll have to justify those choices. And all that information is in the packet, which I realized I don't think I published it. I will have to upload that, or I have to mark it as downloadable, but it's ready. So last thing, let's see. So the assignment packet, we'll quickly go through this, and we have some time for questions, about 4 minutes. So the assignment packet will be available. I'll put it in the lesson 10 module. It has additional details for each of the 10 requests, more than just the name and the description that we saw on the table a page or two ago. And then there's a template for each assignment. So at the portfolio level, we said we have to do a strategic alignment. We had to decide yes or no to each request, and then we had to provide a rationale. So there's one template for each of those, one page to cover all 3 of those answers. And so you'll have one page for each of 10 requests. You have 10 pages you need to turn in for those 3 assignments. And then assignment 4 is a summary. Remember that talked about cost, risk, and strategy alignment or strategy enablement. And so there's a page for each of those. I think that's 3 pages. And then program management and project management, we saw the list of the items there. There's a page for each of those. So there's a page for each of the 8 items within program and a page for each of the 5 items inside project. So there's 13 pages there. So all told, when you open the packet has all the slides that we've looked at year to date or semester to date. The last section in the packet is section 6, and it has these templates that I'm referencing here. So all you have to do is take those templates, cut them, paste them into a new PowerPoint document, save it, and let me know if anybody doesn't have access to PowerPoint. We can make a PDF version for you. And then you submit that, and that all those instructions are in the packet as well. So last thing I have, again, just closing with this Creative Liberty license. The information is limited in the requests. So use what you've learned in class and then take some creative liberties. Fill that in. Be creative. The note there at the bottom, it's as much about your thought process as it is the answers. And that is so true at the portfolio level. Oftentimes projects are very black and white. It's on time or it's not. At the portfolio level, there's 50 different ways to fill up your $20 million or however much. You can spend $5 million if you want, or you don't have to spend it all, but you have to justify it. So thinking about it, put your thoughts in the template, save it as yours and turn it in. So questions? I know we're running short on time.
Yeah, I got one, Jay.
Yep, go ahead.
Did you say the programs that we pick cannot, like for sure, cannot exceed $20 million, or it's make a good case for it?
I did not specify that.
Okay.
So when you open the packet, the download packet, there's actually at that point, one of those pages, it says, do you have any creative financial needs? And then there's a couple examples. I'll let you read those in there. But it does not mandate that you spend just that amount. So if you're going to say, I want to spend $35 million, and you're going to go into the board of directors and ask for 35 million when they've told you to come in with 20, you can certainly do that if you would like. You better have good rationale. Any other questions? I know this is all completely like, oh my gosh, this is way, it's crazy. I'm asking for a little bit of grace. It's the first version of this. A lot of this I threw together while Brent was doing some stuff, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to have it bounce off of him. So if it turns out to be a lead balloon, it's my fault, not his. And I hope it works well. I think you're gonna have fun with this, and there's 5 weeks, I think. So we have lots of time for Q&A. There's no gotchas here. Again, have some fun with it. Fill out the templates, and let's talk about what's coming up next real quickly, because I know we're running short on time. So admin, don't forget the survey and the discussion threads. Of course, those are every week. Do those. Spring break, there's no class next week. The quiz opens up. It's probably open right now since it's 8 o'clock. You have 2 weeks to do that. Don't forget to submit it. You can save it 100 times if you want. And the final project, the packet, I'll post it here in just a second, and you can download that. Take a look at it over the next 2 weeks. Bring questions to lesson 11. We'll have time to talk about it. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. We'll make answers work. If I didn't think of something, we'll make it work. Upcoming, we have Wasaki, back to Wasaki. So we're going to read chapter 15, which is a big one. It's 46 pages. It's establishing a project support office. And then I put open topic. I looked at some of the topics from the quizzes, and I just put this one out there. We can certainly update this. I need to talk with Brent about this, but in the absence of any other thing, we can talk about instantiating a strategic portfolio office. We just finished portfolio. It's top of everybody's mind. I've got some slides that I've put together in the past. I actually shared them with Elizabeth Gibson for her 50-30 class, that we can drive that topic if we want to. And so I'll talk with Brent, but that's probable topic. And then we have a guest lecturer, Luke Trudell, who I've worked with at both at Digital Globe, and he's an IT executive. So he brings a unique perspective about program and portfolio management as well. So he's on the docket. He'll probably go first in the class. And with that, I'm a little out of breath. We're a few minutes over. I appreciate your flexibility. Any last chance for questions? We'll pull up the roadmap to look at that as we have questions. Anybody? Did my shirt keep everybody awake through the whole time? I had a green pen, and for a while I was chewing green gum while Brent was doing his talk. So I had the trifecta going for the color. So have a great spring break. Stay healthy. Stay well. Don't hesitate to reach out with questions to either of us. We're going to make this fun. We're going to make it work. This is uncharted territories from a class perspective. We're all in this together. It's going to be fun. Let's do it together. Let's have fun, and let's go get the portfolio next week or next class. Very good. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Anything?
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye.
I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks, guys. Have a good break.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.